There are stories in the ancient world that feel less like simple legends and more like warnings. They do not begin with monsters. They begin with beauty, with desire, with knowledge, with a boundary that everyone can see, but someone decides to cross anyway. In the Book of Enoch, that warning begins with a group of heavenly beings known as the Watchers. They were not described as ordinary men. They were not kings. They were not warriors. They were beings from the heavenly realm, watchers, observers, guardians of a world they were never meant to possess. And yet, according to the ancient Enochic story, they looked down upon the earth, and something changed. What began as watching became wanting. What began as duty became rebellion. And from that rebellion came one of the darkest mysteries connected to the world before the flood. Forbidden knowledge, the Nephilim, and a corruption so deep that the earth itself cried out for judgment. But who were the Watchers? Why did they descend? And why did the Book of Enoch make their story so unforgettable? To understand the Watchers, we have to return to one of the strangest passages in Genesis. Before the flood, Genesis speaks of a time when the sons of God saw the daughters of men. The passage is brief, almost unsettlingly brief. It mentions unions, mighty figures of old, and the mysterious Nephilim. Then the story moves quickly toward the flood. For many readers, Genesis leaves more questions than answers. Who were the sons of God? Were they human rulers? Were they descendants of Seth? Were they angels? And why does this strange moment appear right before the world is judged? The Bible does not pause to explain every detail, but the Book of Enoch does. It steps into that silence and gives the story a much larger shape. In Enoch, the sons of God are remembered as the Watchers, heavenly beings who descended to earth, crossed a forbidden boundary, and changed the course of the ancient world. The story begins not with fire from heaven, but with sight. The Watchers look upon human women. They desire them. And then they speak among themselves, knowing that what they are about to do is not a small mistake. It is a rebellion. One of their leaders is named Semjaza. In the story, he worries that the others will not follow through, that he alone will carry the guilt. So the Watchers make an oath together. They bind themselves to the act. They descend upon Mount Hermon. And from that moment, the mountain becomes more than a place. It becomes a threshold, a line between heaven and earth, a place where beings who were meant to watch decide they will no longer remain only watchers. This is one of the reasons the story is so powerful. It does not describe evil as something that arrives suddenly from nowhere. It describes evil as a crossing. A sacred order is broken. A boundary is ignored. A desire becomes a decision, and a decision becomes a disaster. The Watchers take human wives. From their union come the Nephilim giants, mighty ones, violent figures who fill the world with fear. In Genesis, the Nephilim are mysterious. In Enoch, they become terrifying. They are not simply large warriors in an old story. They become the living result of a broken boundary, a sign that something has gone deeply wrong in creation. The world before the flood begins to change. Violence spreads. The strong devour the weak. The earth, in the language of the story, groans beneath the weight of corruption. But the Watcher's sin is not only desire. It is also knowledge. And this is where the story becomes even darker. According to Enoch, the Watchers do not come to earth empty-handed. They bring secrets. They teach humanity things that should never have been given in that way. One figure stands at the center of this part of the story: Azazel. Azazel teaches the making of weapons, swords, knives, shields, armor. He opens the knowledge of metals and craftsmanship, but in the story, this knowledge does not lead to peace. It leads to bloodshed. Others teach enchantments, signs, astrology, the movements of the stars, the course of the moon, and hidden arts that ancient people associated with power over the unseen world. At first, knowledge can look like progress. A blade can protect, metal can build, the stars can guide, medicine can heal. But in the Book of Enoch, knowledge separated from wisdom becomes dangerous. The problem is not that human beings learn. The problem is that they receive knowledge from rebellious beings in a corrupted moment for corrupted purposes. This is what makes the Watchers so haunting. They do not merely destroy the world with force. They change what humanity knows. They accelerate civilization without sanctifying the heart. They give tools to people who are already vulnerable to pride, violence, vanity, and domination. And suddenly, the world is not simply sinful, it is weaponized. That idea still feels disturbingly modern. Every generation knows the fear of knowledge without wisdom. The same intelligence that builds can also destroy. The same tools that heal can also wound. The same beauty that inspires can become obsession. The same desire to understand the heavens can become a desire to control them. This is why the story of the Watchers has survived for so long. It is not only a story about ancient angels. It is a story about power, about what happens when knowledge arrives before the soul is ready to carry it. In Enoch, the cries of the earth rise to heaven. The violence has become too great. The corruption has gone too deep, and the heavenly realm responds. The archangels see what has happened. They bring the case before God. The Watchers have abandoned their appointed place. The giants have filled the earth with destruction. Humanity has been taught arts that have turned the world toward blood, seduction, domination, and spiritual confusion. Judgment is coming. But the judgment in Enoch is not random. It is not rage without meaning. It is the restoration of order. The world has been pulled out of balance, and heaven moves to set the boundary back in place. Azazel is judged. The Watchers are judged. The Nephilim are judged. The flood approaches as part of a cosmic cleansing, not merely a punishment of human beings, but a response to a world where the line between heaven and earth has been violently broken. This is one of the most important differences between Genesis and Enoch. Genesis tells the story with sacred restraint. It gives us a few mysterious lines, then moves toward Noah and the flood. Enoch expands the mystery into a full cosmic drama. It gives names. It gives motives. It gives scenes. It tells us of a mountain oath, forbidden teachings, giant offspring, angelic judgment, and a world collapsing under the weight of corruption. For some ancient readers, this may have made Genesis feel more understandable. For others, it may have made the story too detailed, too speculative, too dangerous to treat as scripture. And this is part of why the Watchers remain controversial. Some people read them as fallen angels. Others see the story as an ancient interpretation of Genesis 6. Others view it as symbolic literature, a way of explaining how violence, empire, forbidden knowledge, and human corruption entered the world. But whichever way one reads it, the story asks a question that is hard to ignore. What happens when beings created for heaven try to possess the earth? And what happens when human beings receive power without righteousness? The Watchers were meant to observe. That is what makes their name so tragic. They were Watchers. They saw. They knew. They understood enough to recognize the boundary. And still, they crossed it. They did not fall because they were ignorant. They fell because they desired what was not theirs. In many stories, evil looks ugly from the beginning. But in Enoch, evil begins with something that can look beautiful. The beauty of the daughters of men, the brilliance of forbidden knowledge, the promise of strength, the power of metal, the mystery of the stars, the desire to rise beyond the limits placed upon creation. This is why the Watchers are not just frightening. They are seductive. Their story warns that not every gift is holy. Not every teacher is righteous. Not every secret should be opened. And not every kind of knowledge leads to life. As the story unfolds, Enoch himself becomes the messenger between worlds. The Watchers, already condemned, ask Enoch to plead for them. This detail is heartbreaking. The beings who once moved between heaven and earth now need a human being to carry their petition upward. The Watchers who descended in pride now look for mercy from the man who walked with God. But the answer they receive is not comfort. Their judgment is sealed. They left their proper place. They corrupted the earth. They brought knowledge that became violence, and they will remain bound until the time of final judgment. It is a reversal. The heavenly beings who wanted freedom on earth lose their freedom altogether. The watchers who crossed the boundary are now confined by it. And Enoch, the human witness, becomes the one who sees what they could not see clearly. That heaven's order is not a prison. It is protection. Boundaries are not always cruelty. Sometimes they are mercy. That may be the deepest meaning of the Watcher's story. It is not only about angels, it is about limits. The limit between heaven and earth. The limit between wisdom and forbidden knowledge. The limit between desire and rebellion. The limit between watching and possessing. The modern world often treats limits as obstacles. If something can be known, we want to know it. If something can be built, we want to build it. If a boundary exists, we ask who has the power to break it. But the ancient story of the Watchers asks a different question. What if some boundaries exist because crossing them destroys the one who crosses, and everyone around them? The Watchers did not simply fall alone. Their fall spread outward, into human homes, into the bodies of their children, into weapons, into vanity, into bloodshed, into fear, into the floodwaters that would wash over the old world. That is why their story feels so heavy. It is not a private sin. It is a cosmic infection, a rebellion that begins in desire and ends in a world drowning beneath its consequences. And yet, the story does not end only in darkness, because judgment in Enoch also means that evil does not have the final word. The cries of the earth are heard, the violence is seen, the corruption is not ignored. Heaven responds. The Watchers may cross the line, but they do not erase it. They may corrupt the earth, but they do not own it. They may teach forbidden knowledge, but they cannot overthrow the Creator. This is why the story remains powerful. It gives ancient shape to a truth human beings still recognize. Power without holiness becomes corruption. Knowledge without wisdom becomes danger. Desire without obedience becomes destruction. And those who are meant to watch over something can become the very ones who ruin it. So who were the Watchers in the Book of Enoch? They were heavenly beings remembered in an ancient tradition as guardians who became rebels. They were watchers who became transgressors, teachers who became corrupters, beings of heaven who desired the earth and broke the boundary between them. Their story explains the Nephilim, the spread of violence before the flood, and the terrible danger of knowledge separated from righteousness. But more than that, their story asks every generation to examine the same ancient question. What are we willing to cross in order to possess what was never meant to be ours? And what might be destroyed when we do? The mystery of the Watchers is not only that they fell, it is that their fall still feels familiar. Because the world still struggles with forbidden knowledge, still worships power, still confuses desire with destiny, still mistakes progress for wisdom, and still needs to remember that not every light comes from heaven. In the next episode, we will follow the darkest consequence of the Watchers' rebellion. The children born from a broken boundary, the giants before the flood, the Nephilim,